This is Series 2, Episode 16, and it's a pleasure to meet Mick Hodgkin. Hello.
Hi. Hi.
So, Mick, you are puzzles editor for The Times and the Sunday Times, and I really want to talk about puzzles and wordplay with you. But first, I should acknowledge that if everything goes according to plan, this podcast will be uploaded on May 12th, which in the UK is National Limerick Day. And of course, for several years now, over 10 years, I believe, you've been hosting this Twitter account where you're posting topical limericks every day, or almost every day.
Yeah.
What's the handle, just so people know?
At Twitmericks. At Twitmericks is the Twitter handle. And my nom de plume there is Mick Twister, which is an anagram of Twitmericks. You'll obviously appreciate.
Of course, you have to have an anagram. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it's always also my an anniversary for me, that May the 12th, because the way it came about was I was scouting around on Twitter for sort of new things to do, if you like, and it sort of just occurred to me, I wonder whether you could fit a limerick in, so the then character limit of 140 characters, which is obviously quite tight for a 5-line poem. And I tried it and it seemed to work. So I then searched around on Twitter to see if anyone else was doing anything similar. So I just searched for limericks on Twitter, and I realized the day was May the 11th, 2011, and the next day was National Limerick Day, May the 12th. Not only that, the reason that National Limerick Day is celebrated on May the 12th is because it's the birthday of Edward Lear, and that day was going to be his 199th birthday. So I set myself the challenge of writing a daily limerick about the news for a year, to sort of culminate in the 200th anniversary of Edward Lear, and then I just couldn't really stop.
I'm glad you didn't. It's well, I didn't. It didn't cross my mind, of course, but I joined Twitter in 2015, and I only had about 6 months before they changed the character limit to 180. So I do have a bit of experience with the 140 limit, but I imagine you are quite often on the cusp there. It's quite a difficult restriction to stick to.
Yes, I mean, in those early, I mean, there are still some people doing limericks on Twitter who try to stick to that. I mean, once the character limit was relaxed, I relaxed as well. Before that, I didn't like doing sort of abbreviations, so I would just try to find a shorter word for the same thing, keep it down that way, really, rather than sort of cutting words up. So it was generally doable, but actually almost all the time it was doable. Occasionally I would have an idea that I just couldn't make work within the space.
Yeah, because I quite often post short sonnets. So with 2 syllables per line, for example. And I remember in the early days then it was really frustrating, and I just go 2 or 3 characters over.
Yes, you did. I suppose you did also have the option of doing more than one. I can't remember if they did threading then, but there were ways in which you could do it, but not nearly as satisfying. As just was something lovely about having it all in one piece like that. It also meant, of course, I couldn't generally put a sort of a link to a headline or a link to us or any of that. So you have a little bit more freedom with more characters. I have to say, I haven't been doing. I'm really not doing anything like one a day. I'm barely even doing one a week at the moment, which is partly just because of a lot of other things going on, and partly because Twitter is just a less satisfying space than it was in the past. In the Musk era.
Yeah, over the years anyway, I've found that there are times I'm really enthusiastic about using Twitter, and then there are times where I think, well, why am I here?
Yeah, I do also I repost them on I've got a WordPress blog, twitmericks.com, and so I repost them on there, and then from there to Facebook. I haven't done anything with Instagram yet, and I certainly haven't engaged with Mastodon yet or anywhere else. But it's just as long as there are places that people can go and find them if they want to.
Yeah, well, I'll include some links in the description. So just in anticipation of this chat, I thought I'd look about the history of limericks, and I've learned a few things that are quite surprising. But the earliest, if we just define a limerick as that stanzaic form of AABBA, with the shortened lines for lines 3 and 4, this apparently in English goes back to the 11th century.
Yeah, they go back a very long way. Gosh, now I'm trying to remember. Yes, there's one. There was a Thomas Aquinas one or something. Did you find that? Or
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Hickory Dickory Dock is a limerick form. There's one in Shakespeare. I mean, there are poems that had that form. So it's quite difficult when you start talking about the history of the limerick, and I've read around it quite a lot and found a lot of different versions of it. A lot of which kind of, bring you to sort of, London in the 18th century and around the time of Lear or just before. And there was some sort of popular song whose chorus was sort of, "Are you going to Limerick?" But it's a different form. And I mean, I'm interested in I would like at some point to do some more research on this properly. But the most convincing links that I can find are actually to the area of around Limerick in Ireland, and a group of poets called the Maig poets in a village called Croom, just outside Limerick, who in the late 18th century used to all drink together in the pub. And I mean, the publican and some of the customers would write sort of rude limericks about each other and things. So it's sort of a little bit like kind of, I don't know, rappers dissing each other or something. It was a bit of competitive poetry, but in Irish, in Gaelic. I've got one good one here. This is a book that I picked up somewhere secondhand called The Limerick Makers by Jean Harrovan. Main book I've seen that's looked into this, and so she quotes some of them in translation. This is in translation. I can't do the original Irish, but just to give you a sort of a flavour, if you like. Both your poems and pints by your favour are alike wholly wanting in flavour. Because it's your pleasure, you give us short measure, and your ale has a ditchwater savour. So you can quite easily see how you go from that.
Dissing, yeah.
Yeah, sort of dissing. But there's a bit of a missing link there, how that then, if it is a direct connection, how that then surfaces in the sort of, different tracks of the sort of Edward Lear nonsense limericks and the sort of like 19th century, early 20th century filthy limericks, which sort of have kind of parallel tracks. I mean, there were a lot of, there was quite a migration of sort of Irish writers to London at that point, and Grub Street and things like that. So it's perfectly possible that that it came via that route, but we don't really have the evidence to show that, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I've found over the last couple of days. That won't you come to Limerick is the one theory, and then the other theory is it's simply that there are lots of people in County Limerick who are using this form in pubs. So that, I mean, that introduces the bawdy and jocular nature of the form. And of course, from there we get to Lear and the idea of the nonsense limerick.
Yes, and it's a very strange one because he absolutely popularized the form, but he also really sort of underused it somehow. I mean, I guess it worked for his nonsense limericks, and they were sort of kind of aimed at children and things. But the making the last line repeat the first is just such a waste of the punchline potential that the form brings with it. They always feel a bit disappointing, really.
That's exactly how I feel. And even when that was sort of loosened so that you could change the last line, but the last word had to be the same as the last word of the first line. And I've got one here by Lear, which I'll read out. There was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I feared. 2 owls and a hen, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard."
Yeah,
I mean, that's really good, apart from the fact
it has this stupid drawl. Yeah, I know. I mean, it sort of works for what he's doing, but yeah, you can see why most people who write limericks didn't choose to go down that route. And then the other track, the sort of the kind of the rude limericks. I mean, I think they start to surface in magazines in the kind of 1880s, 1890s. I think I'd have to check, but I don't know whether you found that in your researches. But then there's the suspicion they may have been doing the rounds in a kind of oral tradition before that, I suppose. I don't know. And then they get gleefully sort of seized on by quite a lot of intellectual, proper literary writers who I think that clearly there's some sort of release in that, particularly when you're a little bit more buttoned down about what you could say in your books or something. That that lots of proper writers also love to write limericks on the side.
Yeah, well, it's a license, isn't it? It's a license to be more light-hearted and to say things you couldn't otherwise say in polite company. If we're talking about the Victorian era, and
yes, absolutely,
yeah. Another one I found I'd like to read is, I see this as the evolution of that the rule we were talking about, with the first line ends with the same words as the last line. This is one you probably heard. This is was published in the Princeton Tiger in the late 19th century. There once was a man from Nantucket who kept all his cash in a bucket, but his daughter, named Nan, ran away with the man, and as for the bucket, Nantucket.
Yes, yeah, nice, yeah,
I like because that's trying to get away from this rule by having
yeah,
essentially Nantucket.
yeah. No, that works because you've subverted your word in the first right. You know, you've given it a point somehow by changing it.
Yeah, there are other Nantucket limericks, but
There are, of
I
course,
probably
yes.
shouldn't say them on the podcast. Do you have any particular favorite limericks?
I do also love all the ones that sort of that subvert the form as well. You know, I mean, that's which has been a way the Nantucket one does, I suppose. I mean, they're all the classic ones. You know, there was a young man from Peru whose limerick stopped at line 2,
Yeah,
and and there was an old man from Japan whose limericks never would scan. When asked why this was, he said it's because I always try to cram as many words into the last line as ever I possibly can.
yeah. I don't think I've heard that one before, but I've sort of seen that there are plenty that do that, just intentionally destroy it at the very last moment.
Yes. But did you come across the argument about the tree and the quad? That's quite a nice one. The philosophical debate.
No, I don't.
I have to find that. It's in this book. It's all about the Bishop Berkeley theory of perception and whether a tree exists when we can't see it. So I'm not quite sure whether this was actually an argument or whether the two were both written. I seem to see them both attributed to Ronald Knox, who was a theologian in where was he in Oxford. And so the first one goes, there was a young man who said, God must find it exceedingly odd to think that the tree should continue to be when there's no one about in the quad. To which comes the reply, dear sir, your astonishment's odd. I am always about in the quad, and that's why the tree will continue to be, since observed by yours faithfully, God.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
When you ask about favourites, there's another favourite, which is quite scandalously blasphemous, on the other hand, by Dylan Thomas. I don't know if you've heard that one.
I don't think so, or maybe.
There was an old fellow named God who got a young virgin in pod. This disgraceful behaviour begat Christ our Saviour, who died on the cross, the poor sod. So I don't know whether you might not want to use that one or not, but
I might try and top it. I might read the Nantucket one, but we'll
but
see.
that was yeah. I mean, that was yeah. That's again, Dylan Thomas, another real proper poet, but who didn't regard, or who will still go for the limerick when it serves the purpose.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about the idea of a serious limerick? There's a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, about Tennyson, where somebody asked him, why can nobody ever write a serious limerick? And apparently he improvised this. There are people now living in Erith, whom nobody seeth or heareth, and down by the marge of a river a barge that nobody roweth or steereth.
Well,
Which is it's very good.
It is. Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know, but it is humorous in a way as well, isn't it? Because the fun is in the words.
Yeah, and I think and the meter.
The
I think this is
ideas.
a big part of it. They're sort of anapaestic or amphibrachtic meters. It's so with this da 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 da. I mean, it's just a comical meter. No matter what you're saying, you probably say something quite dark, and it would still have an edge of humor to it because of just the rhythms that are.
Yes. And do you know the Limerick Pax Laughs Anatomical?
Oh, I do. Yes. I mean, I couldn't recite it.
I'm trying to again. Who is that normally attributed to? The trouble is, these things very often get a few different authors, don't they?
Yeah, I found out lots when I was looking into it. A lot are just listed as anonymous, and then you keep digging deep and you find that yes, someone known wrote it, and it's just been shared so much that the attribution disappears.
Yes, but anyway, yes, that one goes, which is quoted in various Limerick books, obviously. The Limerick packs laughs anatomical into space that is quite economical, but the good ones I've seen so seldom are clean, and the clean ones so seldom are comical.
Yeah.
So again, that's there's definitely a strain of thought that not only did they have to be humorous, but they also had to be rude, which I don't think is necessarily true. But I think where they work is, and part of the reason why I got into doing them about the news is that I think they work quite well on a level of pricking the egos of the powerful. It's kind of punching up and taking the mick. And I think that's, even with some of the rude ones, a lot of that was, I mean, some of the the kind of the detail in them is quite horrible, but it was kind of in a way, it's a lot of them. They may be about sexual abuse by priests or drunken lords or whatever. These are people with a degree of power who are actually who are morally repugnant. But the difficulty is to the extent that sometimes is the extent to which you're laughing at them and laughing with them, or laughing at where the victims fit into all of that, with some of them. But I mean, I think there's definitely an element of taking the mickey out of powerful people, which I thought was also a good way of doing it topically. And then also I found, I think what works on Twitter is, and on social media generally possibly, but certainly Twitter, is humor or outrage. You make people laugh or you make them cross, and then they'll engage and share or whatever.
But it's a great form for satire for the reason we said about how the rhythms make it already comical. So when you read a limerick, you already know that you're not meant to take it seriously.
Yes.
Or that whatever's being said, if you have the choice whether to interpret it seriously or not, you will lean towards it being just a joke. Hopefully. I mean, on Twitter, perhaps not, because people just get angry about everything on Twitter. Yeah, there's one more I'd like to read, just to give a shout out to Lee Mercer, who is famous, it seems, mostly for two things. One is writing the palindrome "A Man, a Plan, a Canal, Panama."
Oh, wow. Great, yeah.
And the other thing is this limerick. And it goes, "A dozen, a gross, and a score, thus 3 times the square root of 4, divided by 7, plus 5 times 11, is 9 squared, and not a bit more."
Yes, that's great, yeah.
Yeah, and it all obviously works out.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's satisfying on the level that 11 plus 2 is an anagram of 12 plus 1 is satisfying.
Yeah. Do you have any personal favourites among the ones that you've written on Twitter?
Yes, I mean, some of the ones that I kind of remember best are actually not necessarily the hard news stories. So quite early on, I wrote one about the pandas in Edinburgh Zoo. They got some new pandas in.
I think I remember this one. Yeah,
I remember this one. Actually, having said that, I think possibly just for the panda names, I might just have to quickly refresh my memory. Quite a lot of panda limericks, it looks like.
Are you searching on Twitter for it?
No, on my blog actually, because it's kind of easier there.
I'm always searching on Twitter for my own poems. There are poems I post on Twitter that I haven't got anywhere else. I haven't. Yeah. So I have to find them. I have to go on Twitter. So if Twitter disappears, then I've probably lost a bunch of poems.
Oh dear. Yeah. Okay. Okay. No, I think I've pretty much got it. Chan Chan the panda receives. The aim of it is she conceives. Yang don't give a damn. Wham bam, thank you, man. The he panda eats, shoots, and leaves.
Yeah, that's great with that reference at the end.
Yeah, so it's nice when you can get a limerick that kind of that makes a bit of sense. And actually, one that I did get into my first book, but what did start life on Twitter as well, which just kind of slightly reused. But so we slightly, I mean, I guess if you're talking about serious, this is serious rather than funny in a way. But because I was attempting to do all the news at that point, not just the funny news in a way. The violent death of Osama was ordered by Barack Obama. Some say of the leader behind Al Qaeda, his dogma was hit by his karma.
Yeah, that's pretty, and that is a serious one.
Really. Yeah, it's a serious one, but it's also rehashing an old kind of 60s jokes. As the punchline. But yeah, so one's with a wordplay. I mean, I'm sure there's some good Boris Johnson ones as well. And
I'm sure Boris gave you lots of material to work with.
He certainly did, yes. And some of those as well. Yeah, some of those were serious in that, a little bit of anger was appropriate now and then,
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think of the idea of, what do you think of the term light verse? Do you think that's too dismissive of forms like limerick, or do you think that's fine because we can own it as just a different style?
No, I think that's reasonable. I think. I mean, you know what you're getting in for. I mean, I don't know. I'm not massively sort of steeped in poetic theory, and I'm not greatly learned on poetry. I've been interested recently a few times when I've been out to sort of performance poetry evenings, how a lot of people are now writing rhyming verse, that's fairly metered and kind of constructed. And it seems to me like for a long time, I mean, this may be very, very superficial just based on what I've seen, but and there are some very good poets doing it as well, doing very good performance poetry where they use rhyme quite powerfully. I mean, it's not like verse in that sense, but it's not. I feel like when I was growing up, then there was a sort of sense that real proper poetry now should be blank verse, or should be very free form, and to sort of start doing rhyming couplets in iambic pentameters was dull and old school, and now it seems, I don't know, I have a slight feeling that's changed.
Well, it's a strange time because that seems to be coming back, but the opposition to it seems to be stronger than ever as well.
Right.
I think you could say that about a lot of what's going on in the world right now. Everything seems very polarized, so it's probably not surprising that this would apply to poetry as well. I mean, so do you write other forms of poetry, or?
No, I really haven't. No, I mean, I've very much a one-trick pony in limerick terms. I've occasionally done something slightly longer when the limerick couldn't quite do it, for a particular kind of news event or something. But no, I haven't done anything else really.
Well, then you obviously have a very, very good natural ear for it, because your limericks they flow very nicely. I mean, quite often you'll see people writing limericks and it's laboured, and you have to read it a few times to see where they're putting the stress on the words.
Yes, it's true, and I find I'm never quite sure how people get very angry with each other about it as well. Oh, yours is rubbish, doesn't say, and I try to sort of avoid being, laying down the law. But obviously, whether I like one or not will usually depend quite a lot on. I mean, if it really just doesn't hold together, it's scansion, then or it's rhyming. But I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people. I mean, a lot of sort of limerick enthusiast tweeters in India who write limericks that I think are very funny, but their attitude to scansion and rhyme can be quite different. And I just you have to sort of take a step back sometimes and think, okay, this is a slightly different tradition again, and it doesn't, and and also it's sometimes it's kind of I can write something that works for my ear, but when you're writing it down rather than performing it, then it has to work for someone else's ear as well. So sometimes they fall flat because actually I'm relying on stressing a particular line in a particular way, and everyone else is reading it going, well, that doesn't work. And sometimes they'll write to you and say, oh, well, that didn't work at all. That last line didn't scan. Well, and if you have to go back and say, well, actually it does, but you just have to pronounce this word like that, then actually you've for a written piece, you've kind of failed.
Yeah, but it's a funny form because there is no fixed meter for it. It's loosely that you've got 3 syllables in the first 2 lines and the last line. 3 stressed syllables in the first 2 lines and the last line, and then just 2 stressed syllables in lines 3 and 4. And there's an idea that these should be 3 syllable feet, so like I said before, anapests or amphibracs, but really you can mix it up as much as you want so long as it flows nicely. There's no fix. It's not like iambic pentameter, so it's a very loose form anyway.
Yes, and particularly you can have a lot of fun with polysyllables at the end and things like that,
Yeah, well, some of the nicer ones, some of the more comical ones in their rhythms, ones where you end with lots of unstressed syllables.
Yeah.
The one you read, the allegorical anatomical.
Yes, that one, yeah. There's another one I wrote that I quite like that was not really very tied to much of a news event, but it was the National Sperm Bank in Birmingham has thousands of vials with sperminum from all over Brum. The gentlemen come, depositing gametes that squirm in them. Yeah,
that's really good. I mean, and that's...
But I mean, that just came back as, oh my God, the National Sperm Bank's in Birmingham. I mean, I thought that's a complete gift. But
that's true. I mean, that's very humorous. That type of rhyme is very humorous.
Yes.
Where you have these unstressed syllables at the end, because you have this license to rhyme one word with several words.
Yes,
and you can be very inventive with that. So, like you say, squirming them. That's amazing. So, were you writing limericks before you opened the Twitter account?
I mean, not really. No, I mean, I've found old scraps of paper that I wrote them on kind of decades ago. Just for a laugh. But and I mean, actually, there is a sort of there's vague family history. I mean, my grandfather. There was one kind of when I was a child, and we kids woke up. One of the guests at my grandparents' house, and he wrote a rude limerick or an angry limerick in the visitors' book about it. And my grandfather responded with another, things like that. So there's a sort of little bit of family tradition. I also found out quite interestingly that one of my great aunts who, they were all born in the 19th century, and I always thought of them as all very Victorian. She apparently absolutely loved bawdy limericks. But
And why
yeah,
not?
so there's a little bit of family tradition, but it wasn't something that that I did a lot of before. No, just for fun.
So obviously it is, however, going to be related to your general interest in words. So I'd like to know more about that then. So how did this start? How did you get into puzzles and crosswords and wordplay?
I started doing cryptic crosswords as a teenager, and I just got very into them, and was sort of quite I've just always done them, I suppose, and then just solved them. And then about 20 years ago or something, with the advent of the internet, there some people set up solving blogs and discussion forums and things about crosswords. It became more of a community thing, and so I sort of got to know other people who were involved in it as well, sort of virtually, and then in kind of real life sort of meetings, pub meetings and things like that. I kind of occasionally entered clue writing competitions. There's one in the Observer, the AZ, things like that. And then, I just decided that I'd like to have a go at writing crosswords myself, and tried sending them around to a few people. The Guardian, like everyone else, got nowhere. And then the Independent had a new crossword editor, Mike Hutchinson, who'd just taken over and was kind of looking for some slightly sort of fresher voices, content, I suppose. And that's the one I sent him, had sort of what passed for sort of slightly more modern references to the internet and things like that in it, and wasn't all Latin and references to old literature and ecclesiastical figures or whatever. So he took me on then, and I was doing them once a month for the Independent, and then started doing for the Telegraph as well in their Tuffy slot, which is basic cryptic crosswords. And so I was doing that alongside my day job, which was as a broadcast journalist. I worked for Channel 4 News, and then for Al Jazeera, and then latterly for the Chinese equivalent, CGTN. And then this job came up. I was honestly at the point where I was thinking of giving up the TV journalism anyway, and just sort of seeing how far I could stretch things with kind of writing more crosswords. And then this job came up, puzzles editor on the Times and Sunday Times. And, I presented myself as someone who understood crosswords and, puzzles in general, but also editing and, meeting deadlines and ensuring accuracy and those kinds of things. And so I started there a year ago, which is obviously, a major change. And everyone thinks that job's going to involve writing lots of puzzles. Actually, I'm writing fewer puzzles than I did before. It's an awful lot of making sure that everything gets on the page and on the website in the right way and at the right time.
Yeah. Are you selecting crosswords from other people?
No, I mean, because there is a crossword editor of the Times and a crossword editor of the Sunday Times, and I mean, I'm working with them all the time. But I mean, they are actually editing the crosswords. But I'm another pair of eyes, and I'm write them occasionally, and I sort of I kind of do other various bits around it, and very much involved in the crosswords, obviously, which is what I like. I'm a bit more rusty at some of the kind of logic puzzles and things, but muck into it all. I mean, wordplay is, I suppose is word puzzles are definitely my favourite, my forte.
Yeah, and you've recently been to the American crossword puzzle tournament.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I don't know, some people may have seen the documentary Wordplay, came out about 2006. I think it was about this tournament. It's been going since the 70s, and it's largely organised by Will Shortz, the New York Times crossword editor, and various other, big editors of other US crosswords, Wall Street Journal and places. And they had nearly 800 people there. It was a fantastic event. The thing is, obviously, they're quite different from our cryptic crosswords. I have to say that because, of course, when we talk about crosswords in Britain, we very often are talking only about cryptic crosswords, but actually far more people do concise crosswords than do cryptic crosswords. And, we have both, and we have general knowledge crosswords. We have the whole spectrum. The main strand in American crosswords is more like our concise, but with some word wordplay elements in it, and there will very often be themes. They'll have sort of non-words that are strung together. They'll have things like that, and they'll have a lot of what we'd call in cryptic crossword terms cryptic definitions. Where you're not splitting the word up into parts, but your definition is not. You have to think a lot about the definition to see what it is. It's not just an obvious straight definition of the clue. I mean, one of the classic ones that's often cited, I think, from Rufus, very prolific crossword set of Roger Squires, was jammed cylinder 5-4, which is Swiss roll. So the point being, you're not breaking. So an American crossword could have a clue like that. It's not breaking the word up into initials, but it is giving you a different way of looking at of defining the whole word that plays on words itself. So yeah, it was a great event. It was over a weekend in Stamford, Connecticut, with everyone or lots of people staying in the same hotels. I leave the whole hotel for 48 hours and I had a chat with lots of people. I gave a talk to the assembled room about crosswords, British crosswords, Times crosswords, and we set them a Times cryptic crossword to solve, which proved really quite difficult. 8 people finished it within the half hour that they were given.
Out of 800.
Out about 500, I think they were on the Friday night, but of whom at least one was two I know. One was a very fast Times solver already, and another one was one of our crossword compilers. Having said that, more of them might have done it with the time limit. I'd soon discovered this when I was, doing their contest myself, that there were several puzzles where, frustratingly, I just timed out because I've not practiced enough at it. And there was, because it's an American frame of reference, there would be some clues that I would get wrong, because there was, it was one thing you don't know, a baseball player, you don't know, crossing with a US organization you don't know or something. But there were quite a few several puzzles there that I would have finished if I'd had another 10 minutes or something. So, that's the unfair thing about time limits. But I guess you have to have things like that in a tournament.
Yeah, I went to that tournament in.
Oh, did you? Right.
2017.
Ah.
Yeah, there was a.
Was that in Brooklyn then, or was it in Or was that
in Stanford?
Stanford, yeah.
It was Stanford, yeah. There was a palindrome contest going on at the same time, and that there were eight of us in the palindrome contest. So you can imagine, and I knew there'd be 8 of us, and I knew there was a crossword tournament going on, and I don't know that much about crosswords, and so I turned up there, having spent 2 lovely days in New York, then had to travel to Stanford. No offense to Stanford, but
New York.
I prefer New York. Yeah. So I went there to meet these other palindromists, and I saw, as you say, hundreds of crossword solvers who were taking it extremely seriously, and I never appreciated before just how popular crosswords are, and so much more popular than any other kind of wordplay, which annoyed the palindromist in me. It was good fun. It was I had a really good time. But like I say, why aren't other forms of wordplay as popular as crosswords?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I suppose crosswords incorporate various different kinds of wordplay into them. I mean, I think, and also it's giving you different routes to get to a solution. I mean, I find this about quizzes. I sometimes go to quizzes, and I can quite enjoy them. But there's very often you either know something or you don't, and if you don't know it, there's nothing you can do about it. The kind of quizzes I like are the ones where there may be an acrostic, or there's a common link that you find at the end, so that you can get to the end and you go, oh, wait a minute, that one that we didn't know, that singer that we didn't know there, it must begin with a B. You can find another way back to it. My friend John Henderson, who sets cryptic crosswords all over the place, he does pub quizzes, and they always have that kind of thing in them. He also incorporates a limerick round with one of my limericks to fill in the blanks, which is very nice. But so similarly, I like general knowledge crosswords are good, because if you don't know the answer, then you'll find another way to it, and you get that as well with the concise crosswords. If you don't know that there's a definition, it might have multiple different answers. It's a dog or whatever, but you get some letters and then you have another way of getting at it. And the American style crosswords have that even more, because every square is part of a cross clue and a down clue, so you can kind of you build up jigsaw pattern. Cryptic crosswords have a different way, because they give you a definition, but then they'll also give you another way of arriving at the answer, which is why we cryptic enthusiasts have very often bore people by saying that quick crosswords are too hard because they only give you a definition. They don't give me any wordplay as well to because with the wordplay, then you can get to the word and then that's right. You've got it completely confirmed. So I think that's certainly part of the cryptic crossword popularity. But as I say, more people do quick crosswords than cryptic ones anyway, because anything, the more difficult you get, the smaller the pool of people is going to be who will engage with it, I suppose.
Yeah, and the cryptics take a long time.
Yes,
for some people can just knock them out quickly, but I find them very challenging. I don't solve too many. When I interviewed David Astle, he says that he does about 4 or 5 a day, and then maybe makes 1 a day.
Yeah,
sets. He told me off for getting these words wrong. It's setters and solvers, not makers and solvers. Yeah.
And in America they call them constructors. But yeah, we use setters or compilers here.
Yeah. So David has some strong feelings on crosswords, obviously. I mean, so I'd like to know if you do. He told me the term Ximenean. Is that the right
Ximenean,
word?
yeah.
Versus libertarian. He described himself as a libertarian.
Okay.
Crossword setter. How would you feel on that issue?
I'm probably sit on the fence. I'm fairly in the middle about it. I think I've probably got more, I wouldn't say Ximenean, but a bit more kind of rule bound, a bit less libertarian as I've progressed. But I do have sympathy with the argument that ultimately, if the solver can get to the answer and they enjoy it, then that's what matters. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I do think that to be fair to the solver, you have to kind of give them some idea of what to expect. And so, certainly at the times we follow, not entirely Ximenean, but we follow, sorry, the Ximenean thing, yes, you probably explained, with David Astle, it's after Ximenes, very esteemed crossword setter who sort of tried to sort of codify things and set down some rules of how you should do things. And I need not always say what I mean, but I must always mean what I say. And so after that, you get a sort of a more kind of grammarian approach, I suppose, that some of the rules that people apply, not all following directly from Ximenes, but, for example, that if you've got an anagram indicator, it shouldn't be a random noun afterwards, like sort of like a fruit salad would be okay. I'd say would be okay because the fruit is part of the salad, but you don't just kind of randomly put a word. I mean, if a word that is telling you something's mixed up has to refer to the object that it's talking about. And so the other arguments about things like, whether Gateshead could denote the letter G, because technically Gateshead is the name of a place. It's not, the head of a gate. I mean, again, if the solvers like it, and that wouldn't be our style, but solvers have it. I'm kind of relaxed about other people doing that. Or whether you can use indeed, the word indeed, to indicate that you separate out. You put something inside that, like departed or whatever. With a DE at the front and a D at the end, and the part is indeed. But the great libertarian compiler was Aracaria in the Guardian, who everyone loves, and who I loved as well. And he just did very good and very funny clues and played with the form. So it's partly one of those things. It's like sort of it's like what they always used to say about modern art, isn't it? I mean, you actually have to be quite good technically in order to do something that looks good, even if other people then say that their 5-year-old kid could have done it or whatever. You have to, or jazz. You actually helps to know the basics, the classic form, before you improvise on it.
Yeah, you have to know the rules in order to break them properly. Yeah. It's an interesting thing in poetry as well, and I'm very torn because part of me is a traditionalist. I love traditional forms like the limerick and sonnet and whatever, but at the same time, I have this urge to break them a bit and to do something new with them.
Yeah,
but of course, then if I go too far and just completely leave that behind, I feel like I'm missing out there. I guess you have the same thing with crosswords. You want to respect the traditions and this codified nature set out by. I'm going to say his name wrong again. Ximenes.
Ximenes, yeah.
But you've got to enjoy it too, and it's probably more enjoyable if you start to push those boundaries and try something.
Yeah, and also it kind of has to stay alive and keep moving. The crossword is over 100 years old now, and it went cryptic quite early on as well in this country. But I sometimes feel that, I mean, what frustrates me a bit is when younger solvers, my daughters or their friends or whatever, say, well, why is this? Why does that mean that? And it's like, oh well, it's crossword convention in effect. Why do we constantly use kind of sailor to indicate AB, or soldiers or even men to indicate OR because it stands for other ranks? And AB is able seaman. And it's sort of struck me really looking into all this that we use an awful lot of abbreviations that relate to the army or the church or cricket, not football, or Latin abbreviations. You might sometimes see, I think not in ours, but recipe for R, which is a Latin abbreviation, or C for V. I mean, I didn't study Latin at school, so I was a modern languages person more, so I have no kind of particular sense for that. But a lot of I feel like a lot of the language of crosswords was codified at a point when the expected audience was mainly men, and who had been to a certain kind of school, and who played cricket, and who'd been in the army probably, and it all happened in the in the sort of 40s and 50s, and just need to move on a little bit. And one of the things I've bored people silly about is that I don't really think that we should keep saying acceptable upper class to indicate you, because Nancy Mitford wrote a book called You and Non-You, and back in the 1950s, and very few people now will have heard of that unless they learn it for the sake of crossword. And crosswords have now just started to embrace instead using YOU for you, because it wasn't in the dictionaries. So we slightly, because you don't want to just have any random letter that people can't verify, we follow the dictionaries, but the dictionaries can be quite slow about updating their language as well. If you put you, anyone will understand that can represent the letter U, because we've all used it in text speak, or
Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
It tends to be more accessible. I think we need to have a more accessible approach to language, to initials and indicators.
Yeah, that's interesting. The whole, all the language around it has to change as well. I was thinking more in terms of styles. For example, the type of clues, new types of clue perhaps need to be invented, because it can't always just be anagrams, as much as I would like that. And
no, we have a limit of 5 or 6 in a puzzle in times. It's don't want to have too many anagrams, but
they're the ones I look for whenever I
do a crossword.
Yeah. I go straight for where are the anagrams? Let me get those out of the way. I can do those. I can't do anything else that easily. Yeah. Do you have a favorite type of clue to set?
Possibly. I mean, it's a type of clue that actually divides people quite a lot, but I do like homophones, because they just allow you to pun. And you have to be a little bit careful, because different people have different pronunciation, depending on where you are. And I do have one Scottish friend who very frequently used to email and berate me whenever anyone in one of the newspapers, not me but someone else, would do a homophone that implied that, say, poor PAW sounds the same as poor PORE. It does in my pronunciation, but not if you say por, or not if you have erotic pronunciation. Now, people argue about that quite a lot as well, because I know people who would pronounce it that way themselves, but would view it as it's kind of a pun. You have to adjust your ears slightly. So it depends how much you're prepared to suspend your sense of disbelief for that sort of thing. But yeah, I did one in my last puzzle that I gave them at the ACPT, that was Mustang, don't leave me now, do you hear? This'll help you breathe. With 13 letters. And the answer is bronchodilator. As in bronchodilator. So yes. So
that's really good.
That's what I mean about, you can actually just sort of use the word to make a joke. A bit of punning wordplay. So I like that kind of clue, but sometimes people don't always like it.
Oh, that sounds good. I mean, it's like I say, it's the kind of one I would struggle to get probably. And
what I like is if you yes, afterwards you smile. At least if it gets a laugh, makes you smile afterwards. When you do eventually get it, a penny drop moment, as we call it.
Yeah. Again, when I spoke to David, we talked about the obsessive nature of these sorts of things, and I was talking about how since I've been heavily involved in writing palindromes, now I can't help but read every single word I see backwards, looking for something. And he says he has that problem too, with constantly looking at what he could possibly do with every word he sees in a crossword clue.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you find this?
Yeah, I think you have to, when you're writing crosses, you go around. And what I'm very bad at is I constantly think, oh yes, great, I'll sort that one up, I'll remember that, and then I've forgotten it. So yeah, if possible, I just write something down on a scrap of paper on the back of a crossword I've got in my back pocket, or sort of note down on my phone or something. But very often I don't, and then it's gone and forgotten. And people do. The other question people often ask is kind of, do you have to have a particular kind of mind? And I know I have friends who swear that you can learn. My friend Tim Morey, who teaches classes in how to do cryptic crosswords, says anyone can learn. I think that's true, but you probably do have a head start if you think in a particular way. If you look at the example I always cite is if you look at an Evian bottle and you think that spells naive backwards, which I'm sure you do for palindrome reasons as well, then you're on the way, because you're thinking of the words, how they break up. Well, that carpenter is carpenter. I think English is also very good for cryptic wordplay, because you can break words up in unexpected ways, not just in terms of their. The most unsatisfying kinds of clue, in a way, are ones which break up a word based on its etymology. Anyway, you want to subvert that. You want to have unexpected breaks in the word, parts of word that take you in different directions.
Yeah. I like carpenter. I like because we call them in the palindrome community. We call them redividers, but historically they've been called charades.
Charades, yes.
Yeah, I'm okay with those clues too. Generally, do you have a clue that includes carpenter?
I can't remember one, but it's a bit of an old chestnut, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So, what about other puzzles then? Now that you're puzzles editor, what sort of things are you dealing with?
An incredible amount of it is, as I say, is kind of making sure that the right puzzles appear on the right days, and obviously you hear about it when they don't. As I say, I do a little bit of things like Sudoku. I'm not great at those. I also have to answer readers' queries and get quite a lot of those. And I thought that'd be quite an annoying part of the job, and it's actually quite fun in a way. You just build up a kind of a rapport with people. A lot of whom, not all, are quite elderly. And then I had this thing a few weeks ago where we had a little mini Sudoku, which is really quite easy and not very challenging, 6x6, where you get about half the numbers. And I needed to make space for something else, and it was only in a paper, not online, and there was a competition attached to it which no one was entering. So I thought, clearly no one cares about this. Let's just shelve it. And I was inundated with emails from solvers who suddenly saw it was their favourite, but many of them were elderly. Some who were saying, some who were kind of, concerned about sort of, battling with dementia, and this was something they could actually do, and so it kept them going. But then others who just said, I like to do all the other puzzles as well, but this is a great warm up. I time myself to see how quickly I can do it. And then quite a few who, grandparents who did it with their grandchildren, things like that. I had letters from, 5-year-old girl who said she'd like to do it with her granddad. So, totally taught the heartstrings, and obviously I brought it back. But it did also make me think about, just the range of easy to difficult puzzles, because those which are involved in it are obviously going to be more on the sort of difficult side in our tastes. But you really do have to have a range, and obviously, in some ways, the easier it is, the more people, the wider appeal it's going to have. The polygon is obviously a good one when we're talking wordplay. And that's quite interesting. I get a lot of complaints about that, people taking issue with a word that's allowed or not allowed, because you have to have a word list that works, and we work off the concise English dictionary, and we don't allow past participles or plurals, and that gets into all kinds of slightly difficult territory. But then the New York Times version of that spelling bee, which they got the idea from from us that have made it very successful as well. And they have their own different rules. They allow plurals, but then you never see an S in it because otherwise there'd be too many plurals.
That's the problem. I mean, that's why we'd have the rule in the first place, surely.
Yes.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. It's good to have a range of difficulties. It can't just be the most complex cryptic crosswords and nothing else. Because and I say we here, we have to have as I'm speaking as a word player myself, not a crossword guy or a puzzle editor, but we have to find a way to popularize wordplay. And if everything's too aloof, then it's gone. What do you think of Wordle?
I thought we were going to get to Wordle next.
Yeah.
I mean, I still do it. I don't share my skills on social media. I think that sort of tailed off a bit. And I find it interesting because I think people are constantly trying to find a sort of new Wordle variant. And I know there are lots of variants, but they almost always make it more difficult. And I think what actually a lot of the appeal of it is how simple it is. I used to play a game as a two-person game as a child, 6-letter words that was very similar. And obviously, this is Wordle is similar to Mastermind. The principle is always there, but it just seems to work very well for a 5-letter word like that, and with a limited number of goes. And so it's a very good, straightforward game. I usually do it it doesn't take very long.
Yeah, well, that's it. Win or lose, it doesn't take long.
Yeah.
I've been doing it every day since the start of 2022 when it first became popular.
Yeah, no, I pretty much have as well. Not absolutely every day, but most days. Yeah, I'm sort of I try to see if I can get more 3s than 4s, but that's not very easy.
I had a 6 yesterday, and I don't normally tweet them, but I tweeted
I think I did as well. Yeah.
Because it was. I think I can say. I think that enough time has passed. I can say the answer was hound. And on my second guess, I had sound. So then, wound.
Yeah, there's too many possibilities. Wound. So at that point, what I will do sometimes, which you can't do if you're playing, what is it? There's a mode where you have to use letters but I would in that, if I can see ahead of time that I've got 3 guesses and there are 4 different letters that could go at the front, and I'll just do a word using all of those letters and which I know is wrong, and just try to
the sacrificial go
by elimination. Yeah, do it by elimination. And then you can get it in. You won't get it in 1 go, but you should get it in 2.
Yeah, I'm too optimistic. I thought, there are 5 things it could be. I'm going to get it now.
Yes,
I didn't, but I didn't lose at least. Yeah. Well, is there what else can we talk about? I've gone through. I think I've gone through everything I wanted to discuss. Unless you want
feel free to plug my 2 limerick books if you like.
Yeah. Well, let's
that before. But basically, after I'd been writing limericks for about the news for a year or something, or a couple of years, a friend of mine who I was working with, whose parents were publishers, said, "Oh, you really should be able to get a book as this, So I approached a publisher. The publisher she suggested, saying, I thought I could write a book, end of year Christmas book, this year in limericks. And came back and said, yeah, that doesn't really work because these topical things get taken over. So I'm sure there's something else you do. Why don't you do a history of the world in 100 limericks? So I did. And not that publisher, but another one then took it and I published that, which was great fun because, going right away from the news thing and just like researching in a very, very dilettante way, history and trying to sum up great, massive past events in 5 lines with a punchline. And so that came out in 2013. And then the publisher wanted another one about royals. So the first one was There Was an Old Geezer Called Caesar. And then I wrote There Once Was a Man with 6 Wives. They wanted one about kings and queens, which again wasn't totally my pet topic, but
well, fun to research. I quite enjoy that.
The research is good. So that's good, and very nice to get. I even got an advance, So I sort of used to joke that at that point I was like one of the few people who'd actually made any money out of Twitter.
Or limericks.
Or limericks, yes. Yeah. But no, I'd certainly be interested in researching the history of limericks, I think, as well, I suppose history in limericks. As you've seen, I think, in your research, it's a very interesting field and without really definitive answers as things stand.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope you do more books of limericks too. I mean, it sounds, for your own sake, I hope you do it, because it sounds like a lot of fun. Just to have a topic, you get to research a topic and write limericks about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've done quite a lot of silly ones about animals, and they're sort of strange and bizarre things that you get in the science pages. So that would certainly be one, a sort of a bestiary of limericks or something. You always have to slightly pick where you pitch it, because some of them, a lot of obviously are rude and involve body parts and sex habits. So it's whether it's aimed at kids or adults, but need to sort of pin that one down a bit.
Yeah. Well, the animal one sounds like a good idea, because everyone loves animals.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've really got the panda one.
Yes, absolutely. You've got a few pandas.
So what else are you working on?
No, that's it really. I mean, the day job is taking up it's certainly taking up more time, I guess. Although it is. I mean, I've in the past jobs I've very much worked a lot of weekends and evenings and stuff, and now I'm working 9 to 5, 5-day weeks, so I have more time in that sense. But then I also spend a lot of spare time doing crosswords. I'm kind of constantly sort of doing crosswords and puzzles and just keeping up with what's going on, I suppose. So yeah, I've certainly got less time to devote to limericks. Oh, one other thing I've started doing recently, actually, I write a topical crossword clue each week for Times Radio, which they read out on air on Saturday afternoon, and then they give the answer. And it's Alexis Conran's show. It's 1 to 4 on a Saturday afternoon, so that's quite fun as well. Again, it's another. I mean, I've always sort of married together interest in the news and wordplay in one way or another. And in the past, I'll have used a sort of a headline I wrote again as a crossword clue, and then again as a limerick in some form or other. It's quite nice to be able to tie all the things together. And I do a crossword at the end of the year. I've done it. I did it for the Telegraph for 10 years, and I did the last one in the Times site last Christmas, where all the clues relate in some way or other to news events of the past year.
I just had a thought. Would it be possible to do a series of limericks? Each one is a cryptic crossword clue, or was that too far from the?
I've done it.
I
have done it. I can send it to you if you like. I wrote, this was quite a while ago. I basically wrote a whole crossword where all of the clues were a sequence of limericks. So it began, for example, if the first one across was, there was an old man from Nigeria tricycling in the interior, and the answer was geriatric, and it was a hidden clue, another type. It was hidden in Nigeria tricycling, so it's in the interior of that. But then the next line carries on. The next clue was the middle two couplets, and then so it all flowed on like that. So the whole thing was a sequence of limericks, which didn't make a whole lot of sense, but they were also crossword clues. I can find that and send it to you if you like.
So the hiddens are basically like the charades, but within two complete words.
Yes. Yeah. It's another type of clue. It's a hidden clue where you just you
have to chop off bits of the words.
Well, it's just there in plain sight, but it's often quite hard to see. Quite often you'll find that the hiddens are the last clues that people get, even though they should be easiest, because like an anagram, you're not even mixing it up, but it's just something is hidden in something else.
But it's I suppose it's misdirection.
Yes, still misdirection.
Yeah. Well, Mick, thanks for doing this. I hope that you can come back when you've written your book on the history of limericks, which you now have to do.
Yes. Yeah.
So, because I'd love to learn more about it. Like I say, I've just had a day and a half or so of looking into the history and seeing that there's not a lot out there. So somebody has to get onto this and find out.
No, absolutely. Cool. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, good luck with editing all of that together.
No, this was smooth compared to many I've done.
Was it?
I promise you. Yeah.